Do you,
Okay.
do you have a turn off time for the devices?
Yeah, about between 8 and 9 o'clock at night.
Okay,
I think
that's
that's
healthy.
pretty reasonable.
That's healthy.
Yeah. Of course, I start at about 5:30 in the morning.
So do I, but that's
Normal life in America.
life. That's right. That's life in the guinea pig cage.
I thought you thought that this new job would be less of a gruel.
Um, it's definitely different. So I have, more support systems but on the other hand, the College of Arts and Sciences here is a really big piece of the university. And the other interesting thing is the politics here are just thicker than crapola.
Really?
Um,
I thought you were so
Right.
sanguine about, oh, it's going to be so different.
It's pretty thick. It's, people meddling in ways they shouldn't be meddling and just, part of the,
Here, that's the nature of academia.
it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, that's irrelevant, isn't it?
So right now I'll give you a topic. So right now I'm up to my eyeballs talking about these conservative thought centers, that DeSantis wants to start in Florida and they want to start one here. It's like,
Oh, they want to
Oh,
start
wow.
one there
oh yeah,
in the
So it's a-
university or in the state?
in the university. So this is, but it's just a thing out there for state legislators to get involved in. And here's no different. So DeSantis wants to do it, Texas wants to do it, Tennessee's done it. And the irony is that when you create these things and they're really just a one-trick pony that's just, conservative thought center, they tend to just be marginalized. They tend to be off to one side in the university and they never really get integrated. So I don't think they ever achieve what the politicians wanted them to achieve.
But they do gum up the works a bit.
Well, they do make my day longer. But I'm up at the same time, I'm a very big fan of teaching our students how to have difficult conversations, how to have, because I think one of the real dangers to our democracy these days is that people, when faced with differences or different opinions, they just go off. Right, exactly, Gene. And they never talk. They don't come back together and try to find out, is there any common ground here? Is there any hope for compromise? We all live together in this society. We should be able to try to find some way that we can come to an agreement on how we're going to move forward. And that, I realize that might sound really naive these days, but it's, it's the way we're supposed to work.
So I have a story about that down here. A California student from Louisiana his father told him this. Said, when you're in New England, you're on the train going to work or coming back from work, and you find out everything about the guy next to you, his salary, how long he's been working there, his dissatisfactions about this or that, and then they go home. And in Louisiana, you meet somebody and they want you to listen to them. And after you do that, and you're ready to leave, they say, why don't you come home with me? Dinner. And so the kind of social middle ground is to how to do both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at least, it's just a shame because, students at Carolina and at other universities report that they self-censor themselves all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is doing that now.
They're just
Oh.
afraid of their colleagues, getting after them on social media, or they don't want to fight. And it's just not healthy. So, these conservative thought centers are really just one kind of, as I said, they're one issue I'd like to see something that takes on difficult conversations across the board. On a regular basis. I just want to make that part of the normal academic procedures here. And that used to be sort of the role of a good liberal arts education, was to
Absolutely.
engage in these debates. And it's, we have to somehow change the expectation.
So you did that just now. You said people are fighting with each other, and then you said discourse. And that's the difference.
Yeah, no, right, exactly. How do you have discourse rather than, shutdowns and arguments?
Well, let me share a couple thoughts about this, because it's something that I think about a lot. One that I've been thinking about a lot is that you cannot have democracy without discourse.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, that the end result of all discourse is law.
Is what?
Law.
Okay.
That's in effect what the judicial system is. It's a system of discourse. The third thing is that, I did a part of the opera that I've been working on. And the part that I chose to present, this was about a week ago, was the expert witness testimony about why copyright should be granted to the Blue Tree Symphony, and why that meant that it had standing in a court. And one of the things he said that was really relevant was that the project itself did something new with conversation. Now, conversation has been a part of art for quite a while as something that is valued and is presented. But what was new about this expert witness's testimony was that you had to put a dollar value. If you're going to copyright the project, you had to put a dollar value on having a new kind of conversation. I'm not sure where I can or will go with that, but I think it's going to be a big part of this opera project. And for me, this is how I work out. It's like working out a formula of a model for how can we go from these abstract ideas to application in the culture.
So that sounds to me like the argument saying, how much is your grandmother worth?
In a way, yeah.
It's impossible.
Well, yeah, he compared it to, well, if you destroy the cave paintings at Lascaux, how do you put a dollar value on that?
Those are, have you ever been there?
No.
Those are fantastic.
I'll bet.
And they set the tour goes through an area that they have reconstructed the paintings so that the original limestone caves are not compromised by, new wind, air, right, and so forth, so that they have painted things over it's like you're in the original cave. And the guides are fantastic. And the whole trip is just, you're underground because somebody found it because two kids fell through a hole looking for their dog. And it's just fantastic if you ever get a chance to go there. It's fantastic. And to think that people could draw around a column in a cave, one they're crawling through, and draw pictures around it in the dark with only, minor lighting. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. So sorry. So
Jim, you should bring me to your college or university and let me present this opera so that we could have a conversation with the students about how do you value a conversation.
I'm not the one who does that, but yeah, I'll ask.
Yeah, I'm going to have a sample, a 3 to 4 minute sample sometime this week, probably, that I could send you that you could share.
We just had a performance of a new opera about Omar bin Said, who was a slave, whose writings survived because he wrote in Arabic, and the people who owned him thought it was just kind of like a parlor trick.
Idiots.
Yeah, exactly.
World's full of idiots.
So he got to write pretty much what he wanted because no one could read it.
So what I wanted to talk about, and I'm disappointed that these researchers didn't show up today, was if the problem is that the only solution to sea level rise is fires is managed retreat, whose justice is that? I mean, there has to be an element of justice if there are laws or rules that require managed retreat. And one of my interests, of course, is Earth rights. Is it Earth rights when you enforce managed retreat? Jean, I know you just came from a meeting with the tribes. What are your thoughts about the abstract ideas that are being challenged?
You're still on mute, Gene. It's only been 3 years, buddy.
It might be good that I am. I saw a National Academy program coming up for the Gulf Coast. They're also calling it managed retreat, part of their program. And so I cringe when I hear that, because, you know, the Indian tribes, the ones that I know, when they hear managed retreat, they hear the Trail of Tears. They hear all these other historical examples of how they had some form of managed retreat.
Right.
And
Yeah.
because it wasn't managed, it was, you know, ad hoc. It was for somebody else's gain. It was, if you get there and you do find a place, you're going to move again anyhow.
Did you
How do you deal with the, I mean, it's huge.
First Jean froze and now Jim has frozen.
You've got some very, very rich people with big, big ass houses on the coast. They got to move. Am I freezing?
Now, not anymore.
You're okay now.
It says I'm unstable, but just everybody knows that's true. So, no, I was saying so you got people who, you know, with huge houses, huge incomes, they've got to move. But there's also a lot of folks near the coast who do not have the means to manage this. They don't, you know, they don't have the money, and their land's going to be worth nothing, and their house is going to be worth nothing. And starting from scratch when you got nothing is almost an impossibility.
And so
Possible.
they get driven out, you might say, and the insurance rules at the moment favor rebuilding the higher cost facilities. And so people's second homes get favoritism, you know, eventually to build them higher and better.
Yeah.
And then the other ones can't be there to be their maids. So it's the rules, as you're asking for, to be fair. That's what your intent was, to have fair rules, not just any rules. They're not in the right place right now.
Yeah.
And
is there any progress between the government and the tribes that you're working with, Jean?
well, since you just mentioned it, today, my phone call was we're getting $1 million grant for filling in these canals with the parish this time. I'm not financially part of it. I'm just the kind of the instigator. So we're getting, it'll start in a while. Anyhow, it's going to be a way of breaking free of the collar that the state puts on us for doing these things. And so the parish is going to end up filling in a lot of these canals.
So are these the canals that were caused by subsidence from the oil drilling?
No, they're canals that were dug to make to do the oil and gas wells. And there were half of them, well, not quite, were abandoned from the get-go because they weren't producing.
Oh, so they dug the canals and then they just left?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
Even though
God.
they were required to restore them.
That's, oh, really? They didn't restore
20
them?
27,000 are officially retired, you might say. I mean,
So where are they gonna get the landfill or the fill?
that's it. If you have patience, you don't need it. You take it off the levees on either side and put it back in the canal. There's not enough to fill it again. But then the levees revegetate within a year or two. And over a couple of decades, the canal fills in.
That's fabulous.
So, I mean, we've tracked them now for 40 years. So we know what's not going to work and what should
Hmm.
work, except for the elephant in the room is higher sea level rise, of course.
Does it rebuild the delta that way?
It has to be done in enough places. I'm frankly wanting to embarrass people by showing them it can be done, that you can
Mhm.
do it. It's low cost, it's low tech, everything, and it's quick.
That's fantastic. That's the best news I've heard about wetlands in about at least 5 years.
Do you go in
Well-
with bulldozers or dredges or both?
There's a bucket dredge. You just same
Bucket
thing that
dredge.
dug it out. You just scrape them back in.
Okay.
And the dredge operators like to do it because they know what happened when they did do it, when they first dredged it. And so they're now repairing things
Wow.
And they're employed.
and they're employed.
Yep.
And they're doing this at the national park. They're doing almost all of them left at the Jean Lafitte National Park, south of New Orleans.
That's such fantastic news. So when did you hear that you got the grant?
At 12 o'clock.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Who's the grant
It's
from?
not my money. It goes to the parish.
No,
for
I
what-
understand.
helping them going.
Who's the
And
grant? Who's the grant from?
It's NOAA.
Okay.
And and it came out, I think I got them to agree that they would pay an extra 10% for indirect costs for the parish. So the
Really?
parish
Wow.
is getting more money out of this than they expected.
Oh, good.
So the tribes must be overjoyed.
Well, we have to do the work, but yes, we're making progress. It's just really slow progress. But if the parish can do this, they're going to learn how to do more of them, and they're going to learn how to enforce the rules, and they'll figure out ways to make people do it. And rather than resist doing this, more people are going to see that it works, and they're eventually going to turn on the oil companies, of course.
So when there's more sea level rise, how will the flushing work with this project?
Well, the plants themselves are going to only be able to live in a sea level rise that's around 10 millimeters a year. And it's probably 7 or 8 now. So when it keeps going up, when it gets to 12 or so, we're going to start seeing lots of wetlands go away.
Hmm.
There's
Is
nothing you can do to stop it.
Nothing.
I mean, the plants have always built up the surface layer, and they can only tolerate so much flooding.
What about the work people are doing with barrier islands and burying buses and so on? Would anything like that help?
Well, they're doing that, of course, and down here, the engineer told me that in 20 years, only half of it'll be left. So it's a constant process of finding sand from somewhere, bringing it over to build up this barrier island to temporarily hold it in place. And of course, that's a national phenomenon. That's not just local.
And the problem of bringing in sand is that you're degrading another environment.
You gotta, they started far offshore to get it, and now they're getting closer. It's like there isn't kind of a transitional geomorphology going sloping down, so that if you dig a hole next to you, it's going to fill
fills.
in a little bit, but then the sides are going to give way, and it's like nothing's connected with the other thing. It's just,
Well, what are the projections exactly for sea level rise? How long would this fix stay in place?
Well, of course, I won't give up on slowing sea level rise yet, but it could last several decades, maybe 50 decades, I would say.
Well, that's something.
I'm saying 50, I meant 5.
I
50
was about to
years.
say, that's a long time, 50 decades.
Oh, well, even 5 decades is something.
Yeah,
Well, it depends on how fast sea level rises.
but in the meantime, the communities are building up hurricane protection levees in front of them. And those always impound the water behind them, and that kills off the marsh anyhow. They all become open water. So, I mean, there's many things at play here. The more desperate people get, the more they'll ask for levies, but then they can't afford to pay for them.
Yeah.
I mean, the levies cost $1 million a mile down here to maintain them.
And how many miles of
think that's what
levees
it
are
is.
there?
Oh, hundreds.
So you're really talking about a couple $2 billion.
Sure.
What's $1 billion among friends?
Well, apparently there are a bunch of billionaires out there hoarding their billions that might have helped the earth.
So I haven't got to read the whole thing, but there's this thing that came in today on the art webinar by Rebecca Solnit. And basically she's saying to win the popular imagination, you have to tell lots of stories and that there's no one solution. And
Oh, she's right about that.
I think we also have to get off so that people see ways to go about this. You know, we have to experience it though. We have to learn how to do this. Like Jim is trying to teach students how to learn to discuss things instead of fight about them. People have to learn how to bridge these gaps and build solutions. And you know, the arc of physics may be moving faster than the arc of resolution, but we got to try.
Well, I think the arc of physics, the arc of technology always seems to go faster, and we always. I was having this discussion this morning with our senior associate dean for the arts and humanities that, you know, it just seems as though technology gets out in front of our ability to handle it all the time. I was listening to some stuff about the new AI bots, the chat bot and all the other things. How, you know, what we are seeing is really just the tip of the iceberg, that already they have much more sophisticated technology. And, you know, there's a real concern that they've managed to create something that, I don't know, think on its own is the right term, but it's, you know, it's darn close to that.
So you saw 2001 with Hal, the robot?
Yeah. Well, how was it? But you know, that was, that's nothing compared to what they're, you know, they were talking about, you know, these AI bots being able to, you know, they basically think on their own,
Right.
which means they're, you know, unless you have some really tight controls on them, they can indeed get out of control.
Well, there was a story today about a toaster that was controlled by AI and could speak. And it told the owner that he should leave his wife and run away with the toaster. And this is a real story.
No, this was one of the examples. This was, yeah.
So
I didn't know it was a toaster, but I did know it was an AI bot that.
Yeah. So Rebecca also has this whole thing about hope, and I've had an ongoing argument with her because she basically says, oh, we can't give in to despair, we must have hope. And my argument is that hope is a very sentimental idea. And we've got to embrace the despair because that's where we have to start from. That's where we're in. We don't have a whole lot of realistic hope, I don't think. But
Did
if
you
we
want me?
embrace the despair, then we can try to figure out what we can do that's realistic.
So maybe that's what hope is, embracing despair.
Well, maybe in a way it is.
What it sounds like you're saying is that it's a way of embracing reality.
Yeah,
And the
absolutely.
reality has both joy and despair in it.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know whether it's just me. Maybe I'm just a dystopic, depressive type, but well, we've talked about this so often. I'm the glass half empty gal. You guys are the glass half full.
No, I've thrown it away.
Oh, you've thrown it away.
He, he drank it. Gene figured that was pretty good scotch, so he drank it. So
So I want to go back to a theme that comes up all the time for me, and I know I've raised this a million times, but the idea of these authoritarian governments that people seem to really like. And I keep thinking that it's an animal response to overpopulation. But do you guys have any better explanation these days for it? You
Well,
can't have much of a conversation if you've got an authoritarian regime.
I think that, people just want problem solved. And if somebody steps in and says, I can solve this problem, whereas Trump used to say, only I can solve this problem. There's some portion of the population that believes in it. Say, okay, go ahead, solve it.
There's a whole thing about the success of the propaganda machine in Russia.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty simple narrative. It's that the Ukrainians are Nazis and the West is trying to keep Russia down. And so the Russian soldiers are heroes because they're resisting that oppression.
Yeah.
And people believe it.
Well, this is sort of the classic, you figure out what you really are, and then you tell the other side that's who they are. So, Russia in invading Ukraine just to grab land, that was very Nazi-like. That's really what started World War II. And so that's what so the Russians are now saying, oh no, the Ukrainians are the Nazis. I don't know how many times we've heard that classic. There's even a name for it. I forgot what it is, but anyway.
Bad news.
What is it? The Swedish thing?
No, I don't know. There's some term for where you tell other people that they are actually what you are.
Projection.
Yeah.
So why is it so easy to convince people of something that's just not true? That's blatantly not true. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
Well, I'm sure the sociologists do, but it's kind of human nature. If you tell somebody something and it alleviates whatever one of their bigger fears, they're going to believe it, whether it's true or not. And if you say it with conviction over and over again, believe it.
Well, I think there's a kind of a human condition that we have to be aware of, that people try to build their own cocoon and they personalize it. You're your own hero, and we all tend in some way to various degrees to protect that cocoon psychologically. And when you become aware of it, it's easier to realize what's going on in your own head. And then you say, oh, or you realize what the fences are that have been put up around, and you can take those down. They say at the end of your life, you don't say you wish you'd spend another day at the office.
Right.
Because there's this kind of subterranean sense of being human that's underneath of all that cocoon building. That those fences you put up are on top of something, and that's what when we realize that there are fences there, that's when we realize there's something more meaningful to our basic human existence, which cannot be removed. It's there. You cannot, you can cover it up, but you can't, and you can ignore it, but you can't destroy it, basically. And that's what we've been doing and learning as we go through life. And that's what everybody's capable of, but they don't do it because they can't see they're in that cocoon. That's my short and simple.
So you're basically saying that denial is a basic human default.
Well, it's more like it's an attraction to ignoring people, to using a shotgun to convince them, or to make love with them in some way to convince them. And so you have these kind of three poisons that kind of kick in automatically, and they can happen so quickly that unless you slow down, you can't really see them. And this isn't my idea, it's others.
I think I agree with Gene. I think it's a defensive mechanism. But
Powerful.
it's definitely a powerful one because people believe the most ridiculous stuff and then they stick to it, even though it's clearly not true. And it's clearly going to end up costing them money, and it's going to cost them their job and a whole bunch of other things, but they stick to it.
So I don't know. I don't know enough about the psychology and sociology of this to make any coherent statement.
Yeah.
But if I think about you're having this conservative think tank in the university, you don't seem to have any fear that it's going to have an impact and encourage people to enter into a state of denial.
Well, if it ends up being, well, for example, we had one of these at Colorado. It was a conservative, Center for Conservative Thought or something like that. The problem on a college campus, a university, particularly Research One University, is that such things, they never get very big. And if they antagonize the departments that are, sort of close to them, like political science and philosophy, et cetera, then they don't get courses taught, students don't take their classes, and they become really marginalized. They don't really do much. And so in a way, they're not, this has happened across the country. They're kind of okay within their own little cocoon, but they're not really doing what their founders intended, which was to change the university.
So you don't feel alarmed by it at all?
I don't know. They're not, I think they're wasted opportunities. I think you can't, as I said, I think it's important to have these critical conversations, these difficult public discourse. And politics is one area you can have that around, but it's not the only one. I think if it becomes just a one-trick pony, so to speak, then you're missing a lot. So, you should be having conversations around all sorts of difficult conversations, like what to do with people who live near the coast, whose homes are going to be taken away by sea level rise, and they don't have the funds to deal with that. What do you do about that? That might sound like an easy answer, but when you dig into it, it's a difficult conversation because there's money involved, and they got to go somewhere, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes out of that. So there's tons of ways in which you can engage students in these difficult conversations that are really important in today's society. And if we can help them, have those conversations without shutting down, without shutting somebody else down, if we can teach them how to do that. And these, departments of communication do this. That's what they do. That's their pedagogy. And it's not some ultra secret mysterious thing. It's just a question of doing it with the students.
So Jim, do you see a way to transform the idea of setting up a conservative center that's set up for one purpose to make it something else? Or is it just something that ought to come up and die and you learn from it? And you can't do anything anyhow. I mean,
Well, all
are there
right,
ways to transform it, you know?
I'm the glass half full guy. So my hope is that there's some way you can take that conservative thought idea and convince people that, you know, you really should think bigger than that. You really should think about public discourse broadly written, and not just make it about liberals and conservatives. Let's make it about civil public discourse about difficult topics.
And how would you do that?
I don't know yet, Gene.
I'm into searching too, so I don't know.
I'm kind of right in the middle of that now. I'll let you know if there's any success.
Because one way would it say have them endow chairs or give
Mhm.
lectureships and stuff. And then it could be that they'll be so outlandish, you know, that nothing happens anyhow.
Yeah.
Or it could turn into something that if it was funded in a way that allowed for that discourse as opposed to kind of the contrast. You know, they could foster open free speech or something.
Mhm. So one of the ideas in my head right now that I'm asking folks to think about is, could we have a program in public discourse? We have one of those right here in Chapel Hill. And we have faculty from around campus who are interested in how all that works. They can join this program. And then the program also invites in every year or every semester a half dozen, you know, thought leaders from around the country to come in and stir the pot.
Yeah.
So how can I be invited to be one of the thought leaders?
Well, first we got to start this thing up. And that, yeah, that's the difficult part right there. And I think even, you know, the other difficult part is what Gene was saying. You gotta get people past the idea that a simple one agenda, conservative, liberal, that's where you want to be. And that's really not the case. You know, there's a false belief out there that that conservatives can't speak up at a university. They can. Anybody can speak up at a university, but you
It's
have
just
to.
nobody takes them seriously because they're so stupid.
That's not civil public discourse.
Well, I mean, their arguments from what I've seen are pretty shallow. So how can you take them seriously?
Well, that's just the point. You need to listen. You need to, you know, because these are, you know, they're people like you and me, and so, and they're sincerely held beliefs. So how do you, you know, come to some understanding of their point of view? How do they come to some understanding of your point of view? That's all about communication. And that's what I would like to see us do better, particularly for our students, because they're the ones, you know, these are the future citizens. They're going to go out there, they're going to run our democracy. And frankly, the way that they avoid difficult conversations right now, our democracy it's not boding well.
No. So how do you make it safe for people to say things that are inflammatory?
You do that well, you can do that in a classroom environment where it's your fellow classmates, where you establish the boundaries, you establish the rules. You learn how to have these conversations in a civil way. And the faculty member in the room is really a referee, where you just say, nope, you're out of bounds here, back off. You know, learn to find out when you've stepped over the line, learn what to do when someone else steps over the line.
So does that mean that, for example, if you had a group of these conservative thinkers, that you should formally invite them into one of these classrooms for a debate?
Well, you had me up until for a debate. You don't need to necessarily debate. You can have a discussion. It doesn't, you know, debate sets up a tone of us versus them. You can also simply have a discussion with folks. You can have a a conversation about abortion. You don't need to have a debate about abortion. You can have a conversation. Because
So,
people have sincerely, deeply held beliefs on that topic, and you should be able to have a discussion with somebody that disagrees with you and not have it devolve into silence or anger.
so are you trying to do that on campus?
That's the idea. Well, yes, we have a requirement for every student who's going to graduate from Chapel Hill has to take a course in called Communication Beyond Carolina. It's a course in civil public discourse. And it's up to me to set it up.
Oh, you haven't set it up yet.
Well, it's a junior level requirement, and our new curriculum just started this year. So Gene will love this. In typical university fashion, because it's 2 years out, they didn't fund it, and they're just ignoring it until they have to deal with it. Well, as the dean, I have to deal with it, so I'm dealing with it now.
Well, can you imagine that you could bring me in and it would help in any way?
Sure. Again, it's just a question of I said we would bring, I don't know who the we is, but there'd be thought leaders brought to campus who would sit down and go, okay, what are, and they, we'd ask them to give talks and we'd ask them to engage in these discussions. We had a discussion on Friday between between 3 people, and I can't remember their names, but I know that they're thought leaders in the area of affirmative action. And because, the Supreme Court's about to hand
Right.
down a decision that's going to impact Carolina, because we're a defendant in that, about whether or not we can use race as a criteria for college admissions. And it was really an interesting discussion because, there were a couple of them were like, that very much did not like affirmative action. These are both Black men, by the way, did not like affirmative action. But, the conversation was richer than that. It was about, okay, can universities do this? Or, what's the rationale behind a university having a diversity requirement? What's the, and I thought it was a really interesting discussion. It was a discussion. It was not yeah, go ahead, Gene.
Do you have an honors program?
Yep.
That sometimes is a good place to begin.
Yeah, we do. We have a program in public discourse that was started several years ago, and it's actually, despite the fact that it was started as a conservative thought center, it morphed into more of a discourse, but it hasn't grown much. It does have faculty acceptance, which is remarkable. So I'd like to try to use that as we go forward.
So would that be kind of a bridge to what you'd like to do eventually?
Yes, but I have to avoid, there are forces who would like to see this turned into a, conservative thought. And that's where I'm going. I don't think that's the best use of this. And plus, I've seen these things. I had one in Colorado. It's okay, but does it achieve what the founders wanted it to do? Not really. So, I like a messy university. I like, where
They are messy.
they are messy. I like that. One of the things I've always enjoyed about a university, and believe it or not, I've enjoyed about being a leader at a university is, there's going to be a mess every now and then. And
What Machiavelli said about countries is the Turkey was hard to conquer because they're all unified, but hard and easy to rule. Hard to conquer, but easy to rule. Whereas France was, since it was so messy, was easy to conquer, but hard to rule.
yeah, can't imagine anybody ruling France.
We haven't succeeded so far.
Nope.
So, Gene, in your work with the tribes and the government, have you had a lot of these kinds of difficult conversations? You must have.
I've attended a couple of tribal meetings, and they remind me of, I'm also when we're in a subdivision, Nancy and I have been the executive board forever. But it reminds me of one of those subdivision meetings, except with really good intent. I mean, they are discussing things, and they don't mind speaking up at all, but they're there for to get something done. It's not a social event. It's a tribal event. So the discussions, there are discussions. They're not, doing a search mission to find out where you stand. It's more like, here's what we need to do, and this is why. I like the tribal meetings, although I'm personally more, let's get the target and let's go at it. So I don't usually, I squirm a little bit when we're in these kind of, let's get something done. But they're doing that to get something done. It's going to really get done because they all agree on it.
Good.
So,
Well, what about discussions with people that don't agree? I mean, I would assume that not everybody at NOAA was gung ho about the money that was given.
no, they were all okay, but for the general question, I have the same problems everybody else has. I'm more asocial than most people, I think. So I just soon go back and work. And I find that every time I go to a meeting, which I usually don't want to do, I have come back and met people and done things and learned things, and it's been very rewarding. But you have to learn how to do that. You have to learn how to trust.
Yeah.
And that's the part that Jim was talking about earlier, is how do you learn to do this? Because you can't, your first thought may be to feel threatened in some way. So you pull back, but you have to learn how taking those risks is actually, that's what you do when you fall in love. You don't say, well, this is really terrific, but I don't want to make it turn down. You go do it.
You don't jump in.
You have to try it,
Yeah.
As much as it hurts when you get told no.
So you think that part of the answer to denial is to teach people how to trust?
Yes.
So how do you teach trust?
Examples over and over, and to help them learn about why they don't trust. They're afraid to trust. They have to learn about that. And I think that comes from a personal level of comfort within your own skin. You realize you can take that risk, and it may hurt, but you're gonna, you go forward. It may not hurt, you have to go up and talk to that first person at the party.
So from what I've heard, and Jim, you can probably confirm this generation is very risk averse.
In general, yes.
Mm.
Because well, I don't know why, but they definitely have the added problem of being able to broadcast shame very widely.
Oh, so they're afraid of the shaming.
Yeah, they are. But, it used to be that it was, a little gossip clique that would shame somebody, or, a small circle of friends. These days you can get on any number of social apps, and, you might have hundreds, if not thousands of people reading what you're posting. And
then sending death threats, especially if you're a woman.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not it's sad, but it's not unusual. It's a teenager commits suicide, or, because of stuff that's being written about them. Sometimes, actually, most of the time, not real.
So I'm not even sure what branch, what discipline addresses. Is this really a problem of communication, or is it political science? Is it psychology? Is it all of the above?
I think it's all the above.
So
we have some folks in our psych and neuroscience department who are studying the impacts of social media on young children. And it's kind of scary, the stuff that they're finding, but they're in psychology.
I have heard a report that the levels of suicidal depression, especially with young women, are super high now.
Yeah.
Do you really see a difference between men and women in the university and how they approach these kinds of issues like risk and trust and denial?
I don't know the answer to that, Aviva. I don't know. I know that in general, all of them are showing a higher level of anxiety,
Right.
but I don't know if there's I don't know. I would be speculating.
Several years ago, when I was teaching at Stony Brook, there was a suicide of, not in my class, but a roommate of somebody in the class. And it was very affecting for the whole school. And so I asked my class how many of them were depressed. Every single one raised their hand. And that was about 7 years ago.
Mm.
And I would imagine the dynamics haven't changed much. If anything, they've gotten much worse.
I think it's worse.
So do you have to, so there's this cycle of shaming and fear and risk aversion and denial. And you have to somehow teach people to trust by repeating behaviors that will allow them to get out of that loop. Is it something that has to be built into every single class that's taught?
It helps if it's modeled in many classes. So as I've told the department chairs the other day, unfortunately, there's a rich spectrum of topics that you can have difficult conversations around. There's probably no discipline out there that you can't do that.
And is a starting point to simply acknowledge the depression?
I think the starting point is to acknowledge that we are not capable of discussing these things in a constructive way. And so we have to figure out how to both be a good arguer, a good expression of your opinions, but also be a good receiver. You got to receive in a healthy way. And that's a big piece of this. Because there's going to be people out there, there's always going to be bullies. And there's going to be people out there who try to bully you on social media. How do you handle that? That's part of the communication skill that you have. So to being a good listener or understanding when you don't have to listen.
There was a story on Rebecca Solnit's Facebook thread today about a young woman who was going to commit suicide. And Viktor Frankl, who wrote Search of Meaning, took her call in the middle of the night and listened to her. And then she decided not to commit suicide. And so then people asked her, why didn't you commit suicide? And she said, just the act of listening. But I met Frankl several times, and he really exuded compassion. He didn't have to say a word. And you had the sense that he was empathetic. So I don't think it's enough to just sit there and be passive and let the information come in. I think you have to somehow project that you have empathy and compassion, even when people are Looney Tunes.
Well, right. So good listening skills, that helps the other person get over their fear of expressing what they need to express. And that's part of the dynamic here, is that, you have a belief or you have an opinion, you don't say it. You're just afraid, you don't know how to do that. But a good listener will help you to unburden yourself of whatever that issue is that you really need to talk about.
So one of
High
the
skill labor, that's high skill emotional labor.
Well, but that's what, part of what we're trying to do in this class is to help people unlock whatever skill they have in that area. Because many people have very, very good skills in that area.
So one way to begin that when you start off is if you look at somebody and they're distressed and they clam up, you could say, "Are you distressed?" And then they will tell you yes. And then you can carry it on, what's it like, or what is bothering you. And, you've only offered to listen,
Right.
and they get an acknowledgement that they actually exist that way.
Yeah.
And that you actually care about them in some way. And that's a tremendously simple, but really fruitful way to listen.
I agree. And
Without telling them what to think, without saying they're wrong, just, go from there, find a starting point.
And so many people would like to be able to say, are you distressed? But so many people just don't, because they're afraid to get involved in the conversation.
Well, this is what I think. I think most women in this culture grew up trained to do emotional labor. And part of what's changed in the past several decades is that it's no longer being taught as a feminine thing. And I'm not sure how many people, I think it's a random skill when people have that skill. But my takeaway from this conversation is that maybe the whole world needs to learn how to do emotional labor.
Oh, yeah.
Be nice. It would be nice.
So how long did it take you to learn that, or come to say that?
Me?
Yeah.
I just heard the term emotional labor about a month ago for the first time. And it's a very, very specific term. And then, guys, I have a new boyfriend.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
his name is Richard.
Thanks for sharing.
He's in Cambodia right now working for the World Monument Fund, working on Angkor Wat and so on.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Work out the restoration. But anyway, at some point we had some kind of an argument, and he was upset, and we talked for quite some time. And afterwards, he thanked me for the work, the emotional work I'd done. And that's when I realized, yeah, I was trained to do this from the time I was born.
Mhm.
And I don't think the younger members of my family were trained the same way, because my generation of women, we weren't in the position to do that training anymore. And not too many of the guys learned it. But when it's done, you can notice. And when you notice and you put a value, then you can understand that it's actual work. And it makes a difference.
Mhm.
So that's been my thinking lately.
Well, I think that's a very, very valuable skill. It's one that we should all develop. And quite frankly, it's a much richer life you lead when you listen.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And I think you're a much happier person also when you learn how to listen.
And of course, the thing about Frankl and his capacity to listen with skilled compassion came very hard won
Mhm.
from the concentration camps. And the insights that came out of that. It would be a good thing if we could figure this out without concentration camps.
Where did you meet him?
Back in the early 70s, I was part of the whole encounter group movement, and there were bunches of meetings and conferences. I can't remember the name of one of it wasn't Esalen, it was one of the others in the San Diego, Southern California area. So I met a lot of those people.
Yeah.
He was very, very impressive and very, very modest, humble person.
Well, It's 4:01.
And even though you're not in your office, you have a little alarm clock in your head, Jim, that says,
Oh, it's right
now
on
I can escape.
It's right. It's on my computer. Well, thank you. It's been a wonderful discussion.
It's been a
you.
very valuable conversation.
You folks are my therapy. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, you've said that a couple times. I'm glad.
Well, I'm gonna keep saying it until you actually believe it.
I believe it. So how come we don't get paid for our emotional labor?
I don't know, but I couldn't afford you.
That's probably true. Would you send me the name and contact information of somebody I could appeal to and tell them that I'm brilliant and I could help you guys and do beautiful, powerful art?
I will. Like I said, we're early in the process, so I don't know that we're quite there yet, but I can do that.
But I would love to have somebody to start a conversation with.
Yeah.
Well, this is helpful for me, you guys.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right. You
We'll
take
see
care. We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.